I spent 4 months designing one pseudo-historical warrior for my fantasy world, not to look cool, but to feel real. Was it worth it in the end? In this video I will walk you through the entire process of creating this character, from early ideas and historical inspirations to lore development and visual exploration, all the way to the final illustration. I will also talk about my artistic approach and how I use history and intuition to build believable fantasy cultures. If you are into world building, character design or historical fantasy, I hope this will inspire your own projects. This illustration is part of my long-term world-building project called The Unknown World of Ída, an artistic exploration of alternate history inspired by real history or pseudo-history and legends such as Atlantis. The project spans vast time periods, from prehistory and Bronze Age through antiquity and into the early Middle Ages. Unlike my usual documentary style videos, this one focuses entirely on process, how a single character design come to life. The most difficult question for me was what a Mongolian or Turkic warrior might have looked like in the Bronze Age. The character I'm working on here is early Tengri noble warrior, a nomadic horse archer. This illustration is connected to the story Rise of the Atlanteans, which describes the invasion of the central continent by advanced seafaring civilization, the Atlanteans. But more broadly, this piece is part of the large goal to visualize what the elite warriors of each culture in my world might have looked like during this fantasy Bronze Age era. Whenever I design a character, I always place them within the context of their culture. How did these people live? What did they believe in? What was their relationship with other nations? And most importantly, what weapons and armor would naturally emerge from that history? That's the foundation of lore, and for me, lore is backbone of world building. Costume design is one of the most important parts of expressing characters. It tells how they live and who they are. In my scenario, how they wage war. I began by exploring multiple versions of this warrior. Some versions were more barbaric, heavy use of fur, leather and bone armor. Others leaned toward a more noble appearance, bronze lameral armor, conical helmets and more structured silhouettes. My plan was to develop several directions in parallel and later fuse them into single coherent design. At this stage my main inspiration were the Yakut people of Siberia and the historical Cimmerians, not the fantasy Conan the Barbarian versions, but real nomadic cultures described in ancient sources. I also work on the riders and horses separately, experimenting with Asian horse breeds like the Botai and Przewalski horse, which are considered close to Bronze Age horses in both build and behavior. As the visual design evolved, the lore evolved with it. In my world, the Tengri attacked and assimilated the forest steppe people known as the Yamna. One of the reasons was demographic. The Yamna were close to Tengri hunting ground, numerous but mostly peaceful, and had large population of women. They were therefore an easy target for the warlike Tengri. The name Tengri itself comes from the Mongol Turkic sky god. While researching Siberian cultures, I discovered that the original meaning of the Yakut name may have been something like horse people or sons of the heaven. That kind of coincidence happens to me constantly. I often start designing something intuitively, only to later discover deep connections to real history. It's one of the reasons I trust intuition so much during the creative process. When I was working on one of the first Tengri raiders and their armor, I designed this helmet with scales. At the time, while gathering references, I couldn't find any solid evidence of armor used by Asian nomads. Only now, while editing this video, I discover a faithful reconstruction by a Russian armorer, a lameral helmet used by the nomadic Xiongnu in the 1st century BC. So I end up drawing something very similar long before I even know it exists. It's fine, but at the same time it drives me slightly crazy. Because the most accurate references always seems to appear only after the illustration is already finished. As the lore expanded, the Tengri became a fusion of multiple historical influences: Huns and early steppe nomads, ancient Chinese civilization, especially early dynastic armor traditions, Siberian and North American tribal aesthetics, and later elements of late Roman or Byzantine military culture. In the story Empire Fall, the Tengri destroyed the Tarkan Empire and built their own realm, Acheron, on its ashes. Soon after, a civil war splits the empire into east and west, and civilization eventually collapsed. This mirrors real history when so-called barbarian peoples like the Visigoths built kingdoms on the ruins of Roman Empire and adopted local technologies and aesthetics. Until now, Tengri origins and traditions were mostly unexplored, and this illustration marks the first deeper look into their culture. I rarely invent fantasy names without meaning. I prefer names rooted in real history, easier to remember and more believable. For this warrior, my key inspirations were the Cimmerians, nomadic horse warriors from the Pontic-Caspian steppe, known from Assyrian and Greek sources. The Xiongnu, ancestors of the Huns and long-time rivals of Han China. Siberian peoples, many who still worship Tengri today, and whose armor, furs and conical helmets heavily influenced the final design. Because this presents an early Tengri warrior, I lean toward more raw, barbaric appearance, but always with sense of culture and identity. Whenever I start new illustration, I begin with research and references. Paintings, archaeology, photographs. Pinterest is my main tool, but I rarely copy details directly. I often only use references for silhouettes or mood. Sometimes I even photograph myself in different poses, which can look pretty ridiculous. Imagine me half naked holding a broom like a spear, but it helps a lot with anatomy, lighting and weight. As always, I started with fast, raw sketches to capture energy. Then I refined the pose and slowly built layers: clothing, armor, weapons, ornaments. Digital tools like clip mask are essential for keeping the painting clean and controlled. Once the drawing is locked in, I block in base colors and test different palettes. After that, I merge layers and start blending. I prefer smooth transitions without visible brush strokes, probably because I started as traditional painter working with gouache. One of my lifelong inspiration has been Angus MacBride, whose historical illustration shapes how I see my fantasy art. The final stage is polishing, highlights, reflections, and small details like scratches on the armor that bring the character to life. On average, a piece like this takes around 6 to 8 hours. I usually work on multiple illustrations at once, so I don't burn out and always stay creatively fresh. For the purpose of this video alone, I pause the editing for a moment and create this additional character. It serves as a simple demonstration of my painting process. The design is inspired by the Siberian Yakut people with classic Japanese straw rain cape called Mino. I pick up an unused sketch from the original concept and paint new armor on top of it. Using the lasso tool, I first created a clean silhouette in the single color. I then connected that silhouette to the drawing layer using clip mask, adding basing colors, and merge these 3 layers together. I always make backup copies of each layer, just in case. From there, I simply paint and blend colors, occasionally adding ornaments or slightly adjusting the design. In the final stage, I focus on details and lights. Nothing complicated. The more tools and layers I use, the harder the process becomes for me. But now back to the original character design. Recently I went back and redesigned this character once again, and I am still not completely satisfied. I try to merge older ideas with new approaches and an expanding lore, but that often makes the process harder. Sometimes it's simply better to start from the scratch. So the real question is, when is character design ever truly finished? That's a question for you. I hope this video gave you a clearer look into my creative process, how I think, how I research, and how I turn ideas into images. If you want to see much deeper breakdowns like this, I share them on my Patreon. Many posts are free and I can go far more in depth there than on YouTube. If this was interesting or useful for your own creative work, let me know in the comments. Thank you all for your support, and I will see you next time in the Unknown World of Ída.